Hello guys， 大家好，欢迎回到我的新影片。今天我想要和大家分享我跟 Dr. Eric Helms 访问的一小段的影片。我们聊到 BCAAs 补充品、EAA 和完整蛋白质，我觉得还是有很多人有很多的不了解他们。这就是为什么我希望有像 Helms 博士这样的专家帮大家回答这些问题。博士是很让人尊敬的科学家，他一直在研究体态和力量运动，特别是训练和营养。他也是一名职业自然健美运动员、健力运动员和教练，所以他除了知识，还有很多经验。我很开心他可以来我的频道，跟我们分享他的专业知识。希望你喜欢今天的影片，请给我一个赞，订阅我的频道。我们开始吧。Question number 2 is about BCAAs, EAAs, and whole protein. Which one is better for muscle building?
Yeah, so there's actually an interesting amount of data on this that's come out in the last maybe 10 years, where we get basically mechanistically the understanding that leucine is inferior to BCAA, which is inferior to all the essential amino acids, which is inferior to whole proteins, mechanistically, when we simply look at the actual muscle protein synthesis responses. So there's a classic study on this that I was actually just looking at for Mass recently. I think it was by Churchward Vane back in 2012, where they gave people either a 25-gram dose of whey, or they gave them a smaller dose of whey, like 1/4 of that, with additional leucine to match the total amount of whey. So leucine is one of the 9 essential amino acids, also one of the 3 branched chain amino acids, which are leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And it is the best way to describe it. It is the mechanistic trigger for initiating protein synthesis. It activates the mTOR complex, which has downstream effects, and initiates that spike in muscle protein synthesis that we see post-workout. So the thought is, oh, maybe leucine's the most important thing. Maybe it's all that's important. However, it's kind of, if all the essential amino acids and intact proteins are not only have leucine, which is the key, they're also like the gas in the tank. So what this study found was that the initial rise in MPS was the same in 25 grams of whey as it was to only 6 grams of whey with additional leucine. However, that only lasted for the 1 to 3 hour window. Once you looked at after that, in the 3 to 5 hour window, only the whey protein group maintained that elevated MPS, so it started to fall off. So it's basically saying, yeah, I turned on the car key, but then I ran out of gas. So the actual building blocks of proteins are the essential amino acids, all 9 of them. So when you don't have a sufficient amount of amino acids, you can't continue that elevation in muscle protein synthesis because you essentially run out of the building blocks. And this has been shown in other ways too. Like if you look at some of the actual trials on branched chain amino acids or leucine or essential amino acids compared to either placebo in groups that were eating a sufficient amount of protein, or when they're compared to protein, there are no studies that I've ever seen where BCAA has beat out, like protein. It just doesn't happen. Sometimes there are a number of meta-analyses where you'll see BCAA beat out nothing, but it's not a fair comparison, So essentially what we see is, okay, leucine is important. That's the trigger. The branched chain amino acids, well, now you've got 2 more essential amino acids, and there are some arguments that BCAAs could have some additional benefits to not just initiating protein synthesis, but because they largely make it past first pass metabolism, so they're not metabolized the same way that most amino acids are. They primarily make it to muscle and are directly metabolized there, so they can be seen as also additional fuel. But the thing is, BCAAs are still in EAAs, and whole proteins contain them all. So the the only scenario where you could think that EAAs or BCAAs could be better than a whole protein is if you were to consume them fasted in isolation. But then the question is, well, why are you doing that? And why didn't you just have a scoop of whey protein? And it's very difficult to find a scenario where it does make sense. And it basically follows that hierarchy. When you look at sustaining muscle protein synthesis, it goes from leucine, you get the first kick and then it drops off. BCAA, it lasts a little longer. Essential amino acids last even longer. And then you can make an argument that whole proteins are even better because generally, when you look at whole foods, they have additional nutrient qualities that extend beyond just reducing them down to being just their amino acids. So for example, whey protein is not just the combination of amino acids that make it up. It also has potential effects on the immune system. And, same thing like if you look at green leafy vegetables, they're not just antioxidants. They also have, other nutrient qualities that have beneficial effects on health. So foods tend to be greater than the sum of their parts. And taking a very reductionist view to going, well, I just need these isolated nutrients, never quite pans out in nutrition research as the whole food. So anyway, I don't see any point in taking leucine as an isolated supplement or BCAA. The only time I could see an argument to take essential amino acids, which I would think would be the only one out of those that would be worth taking, would be that if you train fasted and if you have a scoop of whey, it upsets your stomach. But most of the time these days, you can get a very high quality scoop of whey that probably won't, like whey isolate. And, that should be very easy on the gut. Almost anyone should be able to handle that. And then it contains all the essential amino acids, and it would be cheaper. Even though it's an expensive protein, it's still cheaper than BCAA or EAA.
Exactly. So for all your clients and the athletes you work with, you just recommend whey isolate or any other kind of just whey protein instead of going for the BCAAs and the EAAs, right?
Absolutely, yeah. They don't even necessarily need to take protein powder. If they have a sufficient total daily protein intake and they're not training fasted, you could make the argument. Because I basically don't even consider protein powder a supplement. I see it as a food source. Yeah.
Any application on BCA for vegans and vegetarians? Do you think maybe in their case that could help?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's one that comes up. And the idea is that for the same total dosing of protein, they get a lower total essential amino acid, branched chain amino acid, and leucine load. So if you take a vegan who's taking 2 grams per kg of protein and you take an omnivore who's taking 2 grams per kg of protein, you're going to have a different amino acid composition. And while that's true, we actually have some recent data on vegans looking at not just like MPS response or all these acute measures, but actual longitudinal outcomes in terms of body composition and performance in resistance trained individuals. And we see that once you're eating, at least 3 meals per day and consuming at least like 1.6 grams per kg of protein, it doesn't seem to make much of a difference, at least in like recreationally trained individuals. Perhaps for people at a higher level with really high training volumes, it could. But my general recommendation is, hey, what we have data on would suggest that somewhere between 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kg of protein is like our confident range where you should be most of the time. If you are a vegan, you can just use like the top half of that range, and then that probably should cover any bases. So it's probably not necessary to supplement with leucine or BCAA, especially with the number of vegan protein powders that are out there that are pretty good. So for example, a 70% pea, 30% rice blend has a very similar amino acid profile to like a whey concentrate. It's often called vegan's whey. And there's other isolated amino acid sources now that are looking pretty good. There's some studies on mycoprotein, which is from fungi. And there's, like nut-based protein powders. Sometimes the absorption isn't quite as good, but it's still not sufficient to where when we actually look at applied outcomes that it negatively affects the vegans. So I don't think it's necessary.
There will be any side effects to taking BCA and EAA on top of protein?
Probably not, so long as you're not doing super high doses. There are some concerns, and potentially one of the reasons why BCAA does not sustain MPS as well as EAAs or whole proteins. that because when you take BCAAs, you're taking a large amount of leucine, isoleucine, and valine without a lot of other essential amino acids. So they actually compete for the same transporters. So they may be inhibiting one another when you take them in very large doses. So actually some of the stuff that you used to see online in like 2010 or 11, people would just be like sipping BCAA all day. That could have actually been like a net negative for their overall gains. I think that's actually possible with the amount that people were taking back in the good old extend days. So I think I think if you're going to take BCAA or EAAs, you probably want to do it once first thing in the morning when you go train. If you for some reason can't stomach even a whey isolate, and then the rest of the day just eat normally.
Yeah, I asked this question because I usually see people just, like you said, sipping on BCA because of the flavor, or sometimes because of the misconception that it doesn't have any calories, you know?
Yeah.
and yeah, they will basically just drink that as water.
Yep.
So yeah.
And it does have calories. There's a little more than 4 calories per gram of BCAA. Because,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The actual rules from the FDA and most government bodies when they make a supplement is that I think for the FDA specifically, if it's not a whole source of protein, they can't say it has calories, even though it does. So because BCAA are isolated amino acids, it technically isn't a protein, therefore it can't have calories, but it does. You know, amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. All amino acids have calories, and a gram of amino acids is roughly equivalent to a gram of protein. You just need to get, like, if you really just want some nice flavored water that isn't carbonated, then just get like calorie-free Country Time lemonade or something like that. You know?
I completely agree. Thank you for the response.
Yeah, I'm all in. Brody on the line, I'm tapping in. God out here pulling the strings for me. A girl on the line, she feeling me. Preoccupied by the motivation. Put in the time, pay the entry fee. Bro on the rise, yeah, he kinda nice. Inside of my mind, no one's real as me. Lately, life has been gorgeous. Wake up to clear, my eyes hit recorded. Praise up to God, I ain't chasing no bitch. Swinging and miss, got me hitting these licks. I get the orders, don't get it.